All right, this is the first of what I would consider a two-part series on one, creating a workflow to go from on the Korg Electribe sampler 2 or Korg Electribe 2, and secondly, file management is what I'm going to tackle in the next video. So, if you've opened the box, you're familiar with the init pattern. It, I think, stands for initialized pattern. It's the default on every file, and there are about 250 of them loaded to the drive. So, as you could infer, if you can set up this default file to have all your common settings in it, you could save yourself quite a bit of time when you're creating new patterns. So I'm going to scroll backwards here to, this is the initialized pattern. I haven't changed anything. I was just digging through the menus. And you'll probably start here. And if you scroll to where it says pattern, this is BPM 120. I usually start working at about 100 or 95, making hip hop. If you make EDM, it'll be 120 to 128. If you make really, glitched out stuff, it may be 160. It may be 80 if you want to double time it. It's whatever you find your most comfortable BPM to start, or what you end up at the most often. Swing, wouldn't program that in to begin with. Beat 16, I wouldn't mess with that. Length, if you don't know already, there is a hack with this that when you create a sequence, the first time for any pattern that you change length to 2, it copies that sequence to the next length of the pattern. But obviously that means in the template you don't want to change length, or you will lose the capacity to do that hack, because it only works the first time that you ever change the length to 2. So we'll skip that. Master effects type, you can change this to whatever master effect you like the most, or like for transitioning between patterns in your live set. Key, C, pretty boring. I actually would prefer E. This is a matter of preference. And then scale, Dorian, also pretty boring scale. So I like either the minor blues or the minor pentatonic. So we'll do the minor pentatonic, which is like, so that gives you some kind of bluesy and minorish notes. Chord set. Gate arp is the arpeggiator down here, and what you hear when you're using the chaos pad. So if you switch this to something really staccato and cut up like this, I would keep this at 1. Alternate 13 and 14 and alternate 15 and 16. This is used, to my knowledge, most commonly for the open hi-hat and the closed hi-hat, so that when you close the hi-hat, it shunts off the sound from the open hi-hat. I really only need this to exist on one set of pads, so I'll use 15 and 16 for all my purposes. And then when you flip to the next one, you'll notice it says part, and then you're dealing with the individual parts here, which these settings are pretty good for, because I don't want to mess with the grooves on my template or the voice assign, because you can change this from polyphonic to monophonic. You could actually make them all monophonic if you think you're going to need processing space. If you do a lot of synths, there are only so many voices you can work with, and that's why part priority is a thing that you can either be normal or high priority to make sure that your polyphony is on a part when it starts dropping parts. So anyway, I'd only deal with the pattern parts for these pattern categories for building your template. So I'm going to exit that. And then I'm going to come over here. I'm going to switch to trigger mode. I'm going to hit the first one. And as you probably know, this is a saw wave. I like to start with all saw waves. That way, if you want to program in melodies, it's the first thing that comes up. It's also quite handily goes right into your samples when you start scrolling backwards. So, you know, it's also part number, it's oscillator number 1. So maybe it's just a thing that I like. So I'll set all of these to oscillator 1. The thing I will warn you about is if you decide you want to start at the other end of this and start audio in stereo, it starts linking together the channels. So I wouldn't do that because I'm not sure what the effects would be. So basically what I'm going to do is start with the saw and roll through each of these and make sure that they're set to saw. And you get the idea. The next thing I like to do, I'm just going to do this with the top 8. So I know where I left off. Is they put the filter on. They turn the filter on by default. So I like to turn off the filter. You'll also notice that they left the master effect send on by default. Now, if you don't like everything to get piped into the master bus, if you're using the master bus for, you know, specific group of things and you know you like to do that, then you can turn that off for every one of them and that won't be set by default, which could be nice. So what we want to do here is name this something different. So we hit shift and right, shift and right. And right now I will just make it init pattern 2. Handy trick is if you hit shift and back, you can delete. So we'll call this init 2, just so it looks neat. Right, select destination. We're going to use that in a minute, but right now we're just going to overwrite this current pattern. Write it. Now it's called init 2. So if we touch the knob of death up here, which is the one that changes our pattern, we'll see that everything before this is init pattern. Incidentally, everything after this is things that I've programmed in. But what we're going to do is hit shift right, right. Then we're going to scroll back to 2015. Now this is a little tedious, but you just keep hitting shift right, right, 2014. Shift right, right, 2013. Shift right, right, 2012, right. Shift right, right, 2011, right. And then you have your default written to all these files. You do that about 250 times and you'll be all set on your unit. The other thing I recommend doing for the sampler is getting the blank sample set. And we'll go over that more when we talk about file management. So I'll see you in the next one.